Hello, loves, and welcome back to my human experience, where the mind meets the body and the body meets the soul. This is season 2, where we will be meeting with influential people that have impactful stories. Julio Angel Rivera is a New York City writer, mental health advocate, and self-defense coach. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu black belt has also taught kickboxing, MMA, and Krav Maga. Decades of training have shaped his fighting philosophy, but just as important has been Julio's experience with mental illness, trauma recovery, mindset, and emotional regulation. In 2018, he sold his martial arts academy to focus on writing, private instruction, and corporate workshops. A former World Masters Jiu-Jitsu champion who is open about his mental and emotional struggles, Julio's first book, Down Sensei How I Fought Trauma and Bipolar Disorder from the Outside In, is available on Amazon. His new book, Internal Jujitsu, Conquering Mind and Body Resistance by Giving Way, is due in May from White Deer Publishing and How to Conquer. Julio's blog on the human condition can be read on Medium and Substack, and his technique videos can be seen at internaljujitsu.com.
I was just listening to your episode with Dee Lynch, and
Yeah,
it was great. It was great. There was something super that you said in the episode. You said, we're all a villain in someone else's story. And that really, that hit me, it resonated with me. Because I think about so many people in my past that I may have done wrong in some way, even though I didn't intend to, and I don't speak to them anymore. And in their minds, I am the villain, Meanwhile, I'm trying to be the hero in my own story, but I'm playing someone else's villain. Yeah. It's fascinating.
I wanted to kind of start, from the beginning. Did you grow up in New York?
I did. I grew up in Brooklyn, in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. And this was during the crack epidemic in the 80s. So it was a really rough neighborhood. There was a lot of violence, and the fourth floor of our building was just to sell drugs and crack. And my dad was the superintendent of the building, so every now and then I would sweep up the building for some extra money, and I'd sweep up crack vials, and it was just like, it was constant, and we had to always be on the lookout for crime, I was the victim of crime early on, and I got robbed at gunpoint as a kid, and I saw stabbings, and I had friends get killed, and it was kind of a constant terror that I was in, that something was going to pop off at some point, And then when I was 8 years old, I witnessed a murder that really shook me up. It was the dad of my best friend at the time that committed the murder, and I saw it happen. And this guy was supposedly a kung fu master. So to me, I thought he'd defend himself using some sort of kung fu move. But the first thing he did was whip out a knife and stab this guy.
Wow.
And the guy was just trying to defend a woman. My dad's friend accused her of being a street hustler and asked her to move because he kind of thought he was the security guard of the building just because he didn't have a job and he'd be outside all day. So he tried to eject her, and that guy defended her, and just for that, he stepped in. He kind of shoved my friend's dad, and right away my friend's dad took out the knife and did it. And then he didn't do any time, so he lived in the building I was living in, and I had to see him every day, knowing what he did, knowing what kind of person he was. So it was a scary upbringing, early on. We moved out of that neighborhood when I was 16, and I finally felt kind of safe, But having spoken to people about trauma, you know that you never really feel safe when you've gone through stuff like that. So I grew up still experiencing the physical symptoms of trauma, and still being in that place, and still worried that something was going to happen whenever even though I was an adult, and even though I was a martial artist, and even though I could take care of myself, I still felt that fear for a long time.
Yeah, they say actually, the scientific studies around trauma, especially when you're that young and your brain is still developing, it changes the way your brain develops. And, it messes with your nervous system, and you kind of end up staying in this fight or flight survival mode all the time. And how do you switch that off?
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you've got comorbid symptoms or comorbid disorders that you deal with, the trauma on top of that will trigger everything for you. So now you're having flashbacks and your ADHD is acting up and your bipolar is acting up and you're just a complete mess and you don't know what's doing what. You just know that you're falling apart, you know?
Yeah. So you went from that to you did bodybuilding as a teen
Yeah.
and a little bit of acting.
hmm
How did you kind of get into that? I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anybody do bodybuilding as a teen. That is disciplined.
Yeah, well, I started lifting when I was 12 because my
Wow.
brother had some plastic weights and I was really into pro wrestling. Um, and I think the idea of getting big and putting some armor around my body and making people think that I was tough, I think that appealed to me because I didn't want to be bothered by anybody. So I started training really hard, and by the time I was 14, I was competing and I was winning teenage contests, and I was having all these 19-year-olds all pissed off because they were getting beat by a 14-year-old kid, you know? But it was my obsession. It was what I lived for. I'd go to school with backpacks full of food, full of tuna fish and red meat and stuff, and I was allowed to eat in class. I was the only person allowed to eat in class because I wanted to get as big as possible. I ended up winning the teenage nationals as a 19-year-old, but I dropped out of bodybuilding for a year before that because I was pursuing acting and I was doing well, and I thought that was what I wanted to do. And then I got pulled back by bodybuilding. It's such a fringe sport and it's so ridiculous now that I look back at it. Even though I'm still a fan of it, I look back at it and it's still so silly. Um, but it would just pull me back in. I get all these opportunities, whether I was hosting a TV show early on in my teens at the same time on PBS. And that was going well, and it was opening up some doors for me with agents and with some commercial work. And I'd slimmed down, and they really liked that. And they were sending me out on tons of stuff. And then I decided, no, you know what? I want to get back into bodybuilding. I want to do the nationals again. And I got big again, and they all stopped calling me, and I stopped booking work. But I thought in my mind, well, this will always be there because I'd gotten the TV show when I was 16. I thought, oh, it's easy to book stuff. So as I got older and it got harder to book stuff and I had to start bartending instead, and it all became the reality of the struggling actor in New York. But once I was done with bodybuilding at 23, I knew that I wanted to pursue acting and writing full on. At the time, I was screenwriting, and that was my goal, to move to California and keep pursuing that. But I ended up teaching martial arts, and I ended up opening my own school soon after that, and I didn't expect it, but my life took root here. I got married here, and I had a child, and so everything changed. And I certainly don't regret any of it because I have my daughter. But I was talking to my therapist actually today about all the opportunities that I kind of let slide, like when I was acting and I had that door open. Right out of college, I was writing for Muscle and Fitness, and so I thought it was easy to get a job with a national publication. And then again, bodybuilding pulled me away from that. I was getting ready for the Mr. USA, and I turned down an assignment because I was getting ready for the show, and they stopped giving me assignments after that. So, I would have these opportunities, and then I would do something to mess it up. And then in acting, you come so close sometimes to like life-changing things happening. And I had several times that I thought I was so close, I would be in tears because it was like, that's it. My life is going to change. I'm moving to California. And then it would fall through at the last minute. And it was just so heartbreaking each time it happened. And finally, one day I had a meeting with a big agent and I was just over it all. And I went into the meeting and he says to me, it seems like you don't want to be here. And I said, well, to be honest, these things make me feel like I'm asking for approval from my dad, and I'm tired of doing that. So that's kind of why I'm like this today. And he said, okay, I understand that. And the next day I kind of sobered up and I wrote to him, I'm sorry, I took some cold medication. I must have been, acting up because of that, because I was petrified. But sure enough, I didn't get that agent. So again, I was kind of stepping on my own feet. But looking back, I think that was all because I was meant to have my daughter. And if any of that stuff would have worked out, she wouldn't be a reality in the way that she is, and she's so awesome that I couldn't even imagine that, you know? Yeah.
I love to hear that. And I actually relate to that more than you know. I started my own career when I was 17 in the modeling and acting world. I was like right on the brink of so many opportunities, so many times, so much so that I had been invited to, it was called the International Modeling and Talent Association, like convention they held in LA. And it's where you met with all the big agents from all around the
Oh,
world.
wow.
And I was supposed to go there, and right before the trip, kind of same thing. I stepped on my own toes. Everything kind of fell apart last minute.
Yeah.
And I think about those things
Mm.
too, because what a different life
Yeah.
it would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, I look back, and if I would have made it as an actor and moved to LA, I think I would have probably OD'd. You know, I was living a crazy life at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of success, I don't think I was ready for it. It would have driven me over the
Mm-hmm.
edge, you know? And I can be honest with myself and say that, because I know it took me a long time to shake that whole party. I need to be at a party all the time so that I feel like I'm loved and I feel like you know, I'm being seen, and it
Mm-hmm.
was just like this emptiness. Once the drugs would wear off and the party was over, there was just this incredible, like, cavernous emptiness inside of me. And I know if I would have gone and pursued acting and realized at some point that it didn't make me happy, I can't imagine what kind of hole I would have fallen into, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that industry in general, if you don't have kind of a hold on, your emotional issues or trauma, that it can kind of perpetuate those
Yeah.
things, make it
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah. And
Definitely.
I hadn't been through therapy, and I wasn't on meds, and I didn't even know about some of my disorders at the time. So they would have definitely manifested within that kind of pressure, and, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that I would have survived it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer that everything happens for a reason, and we tend to get taken down these different paths to learn different lessons. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of times that's what's happening. Even if we can't really see it in the moment, in hindsight,
Hmm.
everything I feel like makes sense eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're so up close to the picture. We're staring at it from like a few inches away, and then as we keep backing up, we keep seeing more and more of it, and then eventually, as we step back far enough, we can see this huge picture that we missed before, and we see where we fit in, you know.
Mhm.
And even then, we don't see the whole
Yeah,
thing, and we never will. If we could,
totally.
we'd be the one universal thing, right? If we could see everything, but we're
Yeah.
not. So, yeah.
Yes, for sure. So, what inspired you to develop the concept of internal jujitsu, and how does it differ from traditional martial art practices?
You know, I had the thought, and I remember the day, because when I went into my apartment, I just wanted to write it down. I wanted to write just the words down, and I couldn't find a pen, so I wrote it in crayon, and I'll never forget that. I wrote Internal Jujitsu for the first time in crayon. And to me, you know, after going through so much therapy and so many mental health issues, yet always being so focused on the physical my whole life from the time I was 12, I
Mhm.
realized that building a facade of strength wasn't enough, you know, because the fear was still always going to be there. And I realized that my internal work was just as important, if not far more important, than the physical stuff that I was doing. Um, and that if I was ever going to find any kind of joy in my life, I needed to focus more on the internal me. And from that day on, I did. I switched my focus from the physical to the mental and emotional, while still keeping the physical stuff because it's part of who I am and it's part of my mental health
Mhm.
regimen. It's what helps me feel
Yeah.
better. You know, as much as I hate going to the gym now, I used to love it. I hate it now, but I still do it. You know, and
Yeah.
even though martial arts as a whole is supposed to have this spiritual element, a lot of it is very like cookie cutter, you know, and have respect
Mhm.
and bow and, you know, say yes sensei, no sensei, but these things are very superficial. And even though I've seen martial arts build character in people, There's also always a reason why the person comes to the class to begin with. And usually it's because they want to feel more confident because someone in their past made them not feel confident, or maybe they feel like they have to show that they're tough enough because once they were abused and they need to conquer that. There's always a reason why they're there, and it's very rarely just to get in shape or to learn how to fight, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important for us to get to the underlying reason that you're on the mat. You know, was it trauma that you faced? Because if it was trauma and you're not looking at it, then you're going to be triggered at moments and you won't know why. So it won't matter what you know how to do or how well you fight when you're frozen. Um, so once I realized that, I knew that I had to go deeper into the mental and emotional side of jiu-jitsu. And jiu-jitsu is such a great metaphor for life, you know, in itself. We call it the human chess match because you always have to be thinking ahead, but you also have to be in the moment. That's the huge challenge of it, you know. And in jiu-jitsu, if you're
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from your partner, you're not going to have grips, you're not going to have direction. And in life, if you're disconnected to everything around you, you're not going to have any direction, you know. You're not going to see as much of that big picture that you were talking about before.
Hmm. I like that. I like that a lot. And not that I've ever practiced that specifically, but I can relate to the part of I weightlift and I train really heavily in the gym. And part of that was, like you said, it was because of my trauma. And it was a way for me to feel like I can protect myself. And what happened to me will never happen to me again because I'm going to be stronger now and I can defend myself,
Yeah.
type of thing. But until I really started dealing with the mental side of that, I mean, yes, my body was getting stronger, but it wasn't helping me feel any better
Mm,
in my day to day.
yeah. Yeah. And just like so many other things, we think that once I get in shape, I'm going to feel so good, you know. And for so many people, that happens and they still feel empty inside, you know. And it's the same for
Hmm.
money or you know, even relationships. You think once I find that person, I'm going to feel complete, but you didn't complete yourself to begin with, so that person is not going to complete you. You know, they're going to
Yeah,
remind you of what you're missing, if nothing else. You know.
100%.
Yeah.
I agree with that. So I know we've talked a little bit about your personal experiences with trauma. How do you feel like it's shaped your teaching methods?
I'm very realistic when I teach. Um, unfortunately, there are a lot of schools that are what we call McDojos that basically just charge you for belts and promotions, and the quality of the teaching isn't really up to snuff, and the situations that they train their students in aren't realistic. So I
Mm-hmm.
really I'm a real stickler for realism when we're training. Um, Unfortunately, I had to fight a lot as a kid. I wasn't a good fighter as a kid, but I fought a lot. And I've seen real violence, and I've seen, you know, assaults with guns and with knives. And I worked in nightclubs for years. So all these physical
Hmm.
altercations, I always say that there's an anatomy to violence, and it's incredibly chaotic, and you have to know going in that a violent situation is going to feel like a storm, and it's going to feel like the most, the thing that shakes you the most in your whole life is going to be that moment. But if you know that going in, right? Just like if someone is going to fire a gun next to you, but you know the gun is going to go off, it's not going to shock you, right? But if it goes off without you knowing, you're going to be shocked.
Hmm.
So in a violent situation, you have to be the calm at the center of the storm. That's really what the training is all about. The training is less about teaching you the physical stuff and more showing you that you need to, just like with anything else, you need to be present at the moment while still realizing what's going on around you and being aware of it and being prepared for the chaos that's going to happen, you know, and being in stillness at the center of that
Hmm.
chaos, which is something we can use in every part of our life, obviously, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, we stress about
yeah,
everything.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard it explained that way, but I really like that. It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And in jiu-jitsu, there's, you know, once you get to a certain level, you can be training super hard and look like you're completely relaxed, you know. And even in the midst of
Hmm.
like a grueling match, a good black belt will have this calm look on his face, and that's really what we're talking about, you know. you're being attacked from every angle, but there's a certain calm about you because you've been in the situation before. Your body knows how to react, and you know that in order to think, you need your prefrontal cortex to be working, and you can't be freaking out. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you feel like you empower individuals, especially those who have experienced trauma, with your training?
I think that first of all, I let them know that it's okay to be scared. I let them know that I lived in fear for a long time in my life, and I still do get scared. It's a normal thing. I let them know that the anxiety that they feel, sometimes they misjudge it as fear when it's actually just excitement over something new that's happening. I let them know that awareness is the number one weapon that they're going to have in being safe, right? And all too often we lose our attention and we get lost in our phone or we get lost in our thoughts. And we don't know what's going on around us, you know. You see this on the subway in New York a lot. You can be in the same station and not know what's going on a few feet away because you're busy with noise canceling headphones or you're busy on your phone. So being aware is essential. So I think that I instill that in my students, but I also teach them that it's okay to give themselves permission to be violent. You know, most people feel very uncomfortable with violence. I mean, any kind of physical touching feels like an intrusion. So imagine punching someone, you know, a lot of people won't do that. They won't even raise their voices, let alone hit someone. So I like to do a drill when we first start where they have to yell at the other person. They have to scream. They have to scream no as loud as possible with authority. And 75% of them can't do it. You know, it's really amazing. They won't give themselves permission to do that. So we have to break through that barrier first. And the voice is so powerful. You know, if you can't use your voice to begin with, then you're muting your power. I remember I never yell at my daughter, right? The last time my daughter's 10, the last time I yelled at her or I raised my voice, I think she was 2.5. And I saw her reaction and I was like, I'm never going to yell at this kid again, ever, you know? But one day we were at this garden and I was talking to a parent and she kind of drifted off, which she never really does. So I called her name. She didn't hear me. And then I called it in like the most booming voice that I could possibly muster, you know, and she ran over crying just from my voice. And I was like, honey, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And she was just like shaken up. The voice is so powerful, you know, it can actually make the other person vibrate. It can make the other person feel something viscerally, you know. So breaking through that barrier is important. Giving yourself permission, you know. I was on the subway a couple of years ago, and there was a man who was causing a disturbance, and this older woman came and she sat next to me in this two-seater, and she apologized to me for squeezing in, but she was scared, you know. And giving herself, even though she felt uncomfortable doing it, giving herself permission to move and sit next to me instead was the right thing to do, you know. So she had to break through that barrier to do that, you know, and that's something we all have to deal with. We all have our set boundaries that we have around us, and those have to be really strongly established, you know. But you know, you have to know how to react when someone crosses that boundary, and you have to commit to it, and that starts with giving yourself permission to act.
Yeah. You know, when it comes to like the fight or flight responses, and then they also say there's freeze and fawn, I tend to definitely, I mean, I would say more so in the past, but freeze. So it's like you said, giving myself that permission to actually move through that instead of like panicking and freezing up and
Yeah.
not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other reaction. When I first started teaching at this one Krav Maga school, I remember my first couple of classes just shaking my head because you could see the fear in every technique. You could see them holding back and afraid to act. And you knew that if it was a real situation, they would just freeze completely because they were practically frozen in practice, you know. We always say that the way that you train is going to be the way that you fight. And some people, they give away their whole personality and they give away what their hang-ups are in the way that they step, in the way that they move their hands, in the way that they hold their posture, in the way that they sway back and forth, in the way that they just step with their feet. If their feet are they're stepping at a certain angle, or if they're tiptoeing, or if they're flat-footed and they're on their heels, it always says something about them. So I kind of evaluate that when I first have a student, and even though I may not say to them, hey, this is what your issue is, I have that in my mind as I train them. So I'm trying to build them up somehow and reinforce something as I build up their skills. So they may not realize it, but eventually they get to a point where they feel more confident, and they may think that it's just a matter of the physical training, but there's much more to it.
Yeah, that's a really great technique. And I feel like a lot of people don't fully understand body language and how you can pick up on those subtle things, just by observing the way that somebody moves. Where did you learn to do that?
You know, I was going through a bipolar hypomanic episode, and I felt, and it lasted months, and I felt super connected to everything and everyone. And my teaching took on a lot more of a sort of a rhythmic sort of feel to it, right? And I started to connect movement to dancing, and my whole teaching style changed, and I was teaching like on all cylinders. I felt amazing. And as I was doing that, and I was standing in class, I was so connected with everything that I started to observe these things about the way my students were moving and the way that they were stepping. And it was so clear to me what their issues were. And I had observed them. I observed those issues in their actions and in their words, along with the way that they were moving. So it reinforced to me that I was onto something, And from then on, I started really focusing on those things about the way someone behaves in their training. Whether, like, I have this one private student now, when we started training, his upper and lower bodies would move differently, like in opposite directions, as if they were fighting each other. And it did turn out that he was going through this internal struggle. He used to be in a business where he was like the evil guy, the evil boss, and he was trying to change and really take in the spiritual side of himself. And these two pieces were fighting constantly, and you could see it in the way he was moving. And I caught the physical side of it before I knew the other stuff, so it kind of reinforced it for me. But that's an example of something that I see when I watch people train.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what motivated you to write your book, Down Sensei?
Well, when I came in and I wrote down Internal Jujitsu, my intention was to write the book and to start coaching people, incorporating Jiu-Jitsu in coaching, in general coaching. So I was taking a year. I sold my business. I was taking a year off from work. I got divorced that year as well, so it was like this huge life change for me. So I sat down. I started writing the book longhand, like scribbling, just to get it emotionally out first. I wanted to write the whole thing. And I wrote it in a way that I couldn't read it. I can't go back. I can't read the notes, right? It's illegible. So, and I did that on purpose. So I got through it emotionally, and I felt like I kind of got some demons out that way. And my intention was to write a manual of how Jiu-Jitsu is a metaphor for life and how we can teach these lessons. But my bipolar, I stopped taking my meds, right? I dropped them cold turkey because I was feeling so amazing because I was hypomanic, which happens. You're at that stage and you think, man, I'm healed. I'm perfect. Like, I'm one with the universe. So I got my dream apartment. I got divorced. I cleared out my savings accounts because, hey, money will always be coming. So I started blowing money like crazy. And I was writing the book, but because I wasn't on my meds, I was cycling like crazy. So I go from one day feeling like I was a god to the next day feeling like I was like the scum of the earth and just super depressed and suicidal. So the book turned into me chronicling that. It just turned into me saying what I was feeling from day to day, going through this cycling with
Mm-hmm.
with chapters here and there of what I originally meant to write, but it turned into this 500-page memoir that really is a look inside what can happen when you're going from hypomania to depression. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Especially because I felt like I had wisdom to share when I was hypomanic, and when I was
Mm-hmm.
depressed, I felt like I couldn't ever help anyone and that I didn't belong on the earth, you know? And that dramatic change, when I was done with the book, it was so personal that I hesitated for a moment, but then I thought, no, you know what? This is what it was like to go through this period. So I kind of, I kind of want people to know that. So I put it out anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second book is actually what I intended to write the first time. You know, yeah, I
Okay.
was on my meds and I was going to therapy and everything. I was stable. So I was able to write what I wanted to write 5 years ago. So it took a while, but I finally got to it.
Yeah, I love that though because you shared like the raw version of your experience and then now you're able to follow up with kind of your intention behind the message you wanted to
Yeah.
share. With your bipolar disorder, when did you first understand or know that something was not right? Because I know along a lot of times we go through life and we're having these big ups and downs, but especially if you grow up, around people who don't fully understand mental health, it's hard to understand that there is actually something chemically wrong going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. I mean, early on, I thought I was just a broken kid, you know? I had horrible anxiety at school. I was a really good student, but I
Mhm.
hated school because of the anxiety. And I'd have to take breaks all the time and go to the hallway and pace and just freak out. And I'd often have to call home and say I had a stomach ache, but it was really anxiety. I didn't know what to call it at the time,
Mhm.
but I'd get these attacks. And I felt very weak because of it. I had a lot of shame because of it. I came from a place where you were supposed to be tough, and that anxiety made me feel afraid all the time. Um,
Mhm.
so I knew that was wrong. That there's no way that you should feel like this all the time. You know. Um,
Mhm.
when I was 12, I started seeing a psychiatrist because I had an incident at school where I got violent, and they advised my dad to take me to see someone. Then I started getting some therapy. Early on, I felt like I was going to hurt myself or hurt someone else. I was positive of that. So I started getting help early, but then bodybuilding kind of it provided it filled this hole in my life. It gave me another
Mhm.
family. I had a community that I was part of. I was the youngest one, so I was like the baby of the bunch, and they all would look out
Mhm.
for me. And I wasn't close to my brother at the time, and my mentor had the same name as my brother, so I felt like it was just meant to be that he was my big brother. Um,
Mhm.
so bodybuilding gave me even if it wasn't the most real sense of security, it gave me enough of a sense of security and enough of an outer shell where my mental health was a bit more stable at the time. Um,
Mhm.
and then when I retired from bodybuilding when I was 23, I'd been doing it for 9 years at that point, competition wise. So I felt like I was doing it my whole life. And when I quit, it wasn't just quitting, the sport or my friends, but it was transforming my body. Now all of a sudden I went from 250 to 190, and I was like, I felt like a sickly version of myself. So I was leaving that identity behind, not just, the stuff around it, but the physical side as well. And I think that
Mhm.
started to trigger more issues in me and more deep depression. But I didn't notice the hypomania. I didn't notice the symptoms of bipolar until I think I was 38 at the time. My ex-wife is
Mhm.
in mental health, and she kept suggesting that maybe I needed medication because what I was dealing with was because of my trauma, and I resisted what she was saying. I was very defensive at the time
Mhm.
because I didn't want to put the blame on my family or on my upbringing or anything else,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to take medication. I wanted to do things naturally. Um, but finally, it became too much. I I'd have these violent outbursts. Like it wouldn't happen often, but 3 times a year I would have this horribly violent outburst that would freak everybody out. And after the last one, I kind of decided, all right, I need to go see someone. Um,
Mhm.
Plus, I was severely depressed for 2 years, and at the time, I had everything. My business was going really well. I had a wife who loved me. I had a baby. Everything seemed perfect. I had a brand new place that we just bought, and nice car, and all the stuff that is supposed to make you feel good. But I was so
Mhm.
depressed and I was suicidal. And I went and I told the psychiatrist this, and he pulled out a bunch of literature and he said, I want you to read these and tell me if they sound familiar, you know.
Mhm.
And they all did. And he diagnosed me with bipolar 2 and with ADHD and with CPTSD. And then suddenly everything made sense to me, you know. All the
Mhm.
ups and downs, all the reactions, all the anxiety, you know, it made me think back to when I was 8 years old again and at school and just couldn't focus and couldn't stay in the classroom and couldn't breathe, you know. And it made me feel like, okay, I'm not broken, you know, there are other people like me
Mhm.
and I can get help. And I remember my first dose of Adderall, my life changed immediately. I was like, oh my God, I can read a book now. I can focus on something.
Mhm.
It made me feel normal. Like I didn't feel jittery or any of that stuff. I just felt normal, you know. And I guess for people that don't have ADHD, when they take it, they can stay up all night and all that stuff. But um,
Mhm.
so it really opened my eyes to wow, I can really feel better and feel like a more complete human being. So that's when I really started taking my treatment seriously. But like I said, when I'd get
Mhm.
hypomanic, I'd feel like everything was great, and then I'd sometimes stop, and things would get really, really, really bad, you know. And then the
Yeah.
depression would be 10 times worse than the hypomania was good, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you integrate mental and emotional wellness into the physical defense training? I know we've talked a little bit about that already, but
Yeah.
kind of bringing it back full
Yeah.
circle.
Um, Well, I like to let everyone know, even if I don't point out to them, hey, this is why you're here, this is why you're really training. I do bring up the question to them right away because I want them to be thinking about it while they're progressing. Because I want them to give themselves those little markers of success whenever they feel like they've overcome something, you know, in their training. And it happens frequently. And it's important, just like
Mhm.
with life, to give yourself that credit, right? I mean, if you have low dopamine, you don't feel like you're ever going to get a reward and you don't have motivation to do things. And that's something people with ADHD deal with all the time. And
Mhm.
I want my students to feel motivated because they feel like they're getting that prize, you know, even if it's not, you know, completely life changing or in other people's eyes. To them, it can be, you know, it can be overcoming these little fears, you know. Um, it may
Mhm.
help you talk to someone that you've wanted to talk to for a long time. It may help you, you know, run something by your boss. It may help you communicate with your family just because you're not afraid anymore to get past this one step. So I make it clear to them that their martial arts training is going to be about way more than fighting. They'll probably never get into a fight in their life, you know. But
Mhm.
it's really so much about confidence. I mean, I've had a couple of students stop altercations just by getting into their stances because now they look like they know what they're doing and now they look confident and the assailant doesn't want to deal with someone who's confident, you know, and might know what they're doing. So one of
Mhm.
those one of those students was an 82-year-old cancer surgeon who went to his medical school reunion and his bully from college was there and started beef with him. They were in their 80s. And my student got us into his stance and he was like, Tom, go back to the hors d'oeuvres. And the guy like walked away, you know? So So it's good to know we don't,
I love
yeah,
that
we don't grow
story.
that mature as we get older. But
Right.
yeah, so I make them. I have to know that you're in it as much as I in it for as much as I am, because I value your
Hmm.
training so much. I want you to value it too. I want you to see it for more than it is on the surface, so that you can get the
Yeah.
most out of it possible. Because if you look at it just superficially, you're not going to get all the value that you can. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. So with your new book, it's coming out next month,
May
correct?
8th. Yeah.
May
Yeah.
8th. How are you
I'm
feeling?
super excited. Um, I've got a great team working with me, a great group of editors, and we have a meeting today actually, so about the launch, and I'm just I'm excited that I was able to put out what I originally wanted to put out, and when I finally
Yeah.
wrote it, it came out really fast because it was percolating for so long inside of me, um, and I've had, we had to send out early copies for review, and I've gotten some great reviews from everyone I sent it to, and it really has seemed to resonate with people from different walks of life, which I really appreciate, whether they're martial artists or not, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, whatever happens with it, I'm very proud of it. So yeah,
Yeah, it's a huge accomplishment. I think even writing and publishing a book, knowing because I went through the process, it's such a commitment.
yeah,
And you really have to, not only believe in yourself, but be able to see it through because it can be such a big
yeah.
undertaking. What are your plans and your future endeavors outside of the book launch?
I want to keep writing. I write essays for Medium and other platforms and Substack, and I want to keep
Hmm.
doing that. A lot about mental health. I do a lot of workshops as well where I combine mental health and awareness, and I love doing those, so I want to continue those. And I want to
Hmm.
continue always teaching my students. That's something I don't really see myself ever retiring from. My own sensei went into his 80s still teaching, so I can see myself doing that as long as my body holds up. Um, I'd like to do more speaking, mainly about the book. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm looking to do some readings at some bookstores coming up, and um, get into local bookstores. Although they're few and far between now. I mean, it's incredible how few like little bookstores there are now. But
Yeah.
for me, it's really about writing as much as possible, so I become a better writer because I
Hmm.
think practice really is important in whatever you're doing.
Hmm.
So um, what the book leads to, I don't know. I'll have to wait and see, and I think that's going to guide me in a lot of ways. So um, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I love that. So I know you mentioned the local bookstores around you, which I hear you. They're becoming few and far between. And I feel like even the ones that are still out there, they're starting to struggle and, just with the way the economy is and people not going into them anymore. Do you have any plans for doing any kind of cross country book tours, speaking, anything of that
We're
nature?
trying to arrange stuff now here in New York first,
Hmm.
before going out a little bit wider. So that's what the meeting today is about. So
Okay.
yeah, I'll have more information on that after that. But I think I'm going to do a book launch
Awesome.
at a Barnes and Nobles here in New York, um, and
Yes.
then a friend is opening a brewery that's a huge fancy brewery that's going to be opened at the end of May. So I may do a launch party there as well. He's going to have a little section upstairs that's like a little library,
Mhm.
so it'll be a cool kind of setting. Yeah,
Yeah, I really like that idea. That's
yeah.
awesome. So where can people find you right now?
My website is internaljujitsu.com. There's some info on there. There's some videos, some technique stuff, and some awareness stuff. I'm on Instagram, Internal Jujitsu, Facebook the same, TikTok the same. Uh, I don't spend nearly as much time on social media as I should, which most people would say the opposite. But I hate scrolling, and I hate and you have to engage, right? But I'm terrible at
Hmm.
engaging. it just feels like such a waste of time doing it, but I know it's not.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I need to do more of now as the book comes out. But yeah, Internal Jujitsu on most platforms, and including my YouTube channel and my website.
Perfect.
Oh, and on
I
Substack
will
as well.
link on Substack. I will link all your stuff in the description too, so it's really easy for people to find
Cool.
you. It's funny how you mentioned the social media thing. I was talking to a friend the other day because she wants to actually write a book, and she asked me what's the best way to grow an audience. I was like, I hate to say it, but it's social
Yeah,
media. And I know it sucks because it's also finding this balance of I need to be present here in my real life, and social media isn't real
yeah,
life, but it can suck you in,
yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, and then so many of the things as you're scrolling, it's just like cat videos and stuff like that. Like, what value am I getting out of this? Like, none. What am I gonna
Right.
do? Comment on cat videos? Like, how is that helping me? So I don't know. I'll
Yeah.
figure it out, I guess.
No, you got this. Is there anything else that you wanted to share or talk about?
Oh, my private training. I do private training here in New York. I work with clients that from all walks of life. I work with a lot of people in tech, and like I
Okay.
said, a lot of entrepreneurs as well that I work with. So if anyone wants to train with me here in New York, you can contact me through one of those resources.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing this space with me today. Truly, I value your energy and your presence, and I loved our conversation. So thank
Likewise,
you.
it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Julio's new book, Internal Jujitsu, Conquering Mind and Body Resistance by Giving Way, is due on May 8th from White Deer Publishing and How to Conquer. Julio's blog on the human condition can be read on Medium and Substack, and his technique videos can be seen at internaljujitsu.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to my podcast. Remember, loves, your best is always enough. Thank you for sharing this space with me today. Catch you on the flip side.